Hello and welcome to the Property Trio. As always, I'm joined by my fabulous two co-hosts, Mike Mortlock and Cate Bakos. How are you both today?
G'day,
Well,
Dave.
Dave, great to see you. The band's getting back together in a couple of days.
Looking forward
Put the
to it.
bar on notice. Tell them to stock up.
Look out,
Couple,
Yarraville.
couple
Lock up your
in-person
Pinot
recordings.
Gris.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be. It's always great to get together and record in person. I think they just have a bit more pizzazz about them, a bit more of an electric feel, don't they? With the
We can
way we
tease
can
each other
communicate
for
live.
real.
Yeah. So today's episode is Cate's episode, and I think it's a great episode on. So Cate, I think, has talked about invisible issues with property before, and today we're going to actually go through some examples of what this looks like for an absolute expert in their field, such as Cate. Now, some may call it a sixth sense, and there's a fair bit of sort of research and study on this sort of concept of a sixth sense, which a lot of people would put it down to accumulated experience. Ultimately, the 10,000 hours and the ability to assess a situation where others would see nothing, basically. And there's actually science behind it. There's pattern recognition experience, subconscious processing, a thing called heuristics. And
Done some research, Dave.
I have done some
Lovely.
research.
I'm getting my
but
show notes over to you early every time.
but I won't go into too much detail about that right now because we want to hear from Cate because she's going to share with us some great examples.
What was that last one, though, Dave? I want to hear about that. What's that word?
So heuristics are
Yeah.
they're mental shortcuts that the brain uses to make quick decisions based on previous experiences. Yeah. So
That's
while they aren't
amazing.
always accurate, they often serve us well in familiar situations and contribute to the feeling of a sixth sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Love it.
There's also actually a literal sixth sense that we have, which is proprioception, which I won't go into too much detail about, but there's these senses all through our body that allow us to tell us where we are in space. Our body is, it's attached to our muscles and tendons and all through our body. Yeah, but anyway, it's with us all the time, so we actually we take it for granted. It's a bit like a fish swimming in the ocean. They don't realize water's around them.
It's funny how like all of the tools that we've been given are quite ancient. They predate us putting on pants by tens of thousands of years. But all of the things that you're talking about are kind of designed to save us from imminent danger. And
Yeah.
imminent danger is not a feature of our everyday lives, such as it maybe once was a few thousand years ago.
No, but as we're about to find
Incredible.
out today, it helps us with our professions.
Well, I do love how you've phrased that with, some, psychology and explanation, physical explanation of what all of this means, because I titled this Tapping into Your Sixth Sense When Things Don't Quite Feel Right. And that sounds like, a bit of juju, but I'm a scientist by background and I like a rational explanation. And I don't think I could have said it better. You've absolutely nailed what I think goes on, Dave, because I don't tap into spirits and think about having, an ability to see beyond this world. But I certainly use this sixth sense when I go about my business, and whether it's about danger or it's about averting an issue that could bite me down the track or giving me a hint to look closer into something and explore it. That's exactly what it's all about. It's accumulated knowledge and just a sense that sometimes is subconscious.
Yeah, and it's probably your heuristics kicking into gear without you being conscious of it. And you're on the lookout for things that you're not preparing for necessarily, but you're able to spot them and they're micro and they're detailed and they're things that most of us we'd walk on by.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start with the neighbourhood and the direct neighbours. Bring it back to property. When do your spidey senses start to ring alarm bells?
If I can feel some sense of social discord, it doesn't mean that I can hear a neighbour yelling or I can see evidence of a fight. Sometimes you can pick up on things that are not quite right, and it could be the state of the property next door. There could be, I just have to glance over the fence to know if it's a neighbour that we might need to drill deeper into, especially if it's direct neighbour. But if it's the neighbourhood, you can get a sense if that's a high crime neighbourhood or if there's something seedy going on, whether it might be drug related. These things can bite as soon as I climb out of the car, and I will always look further into them. And if there's a direct neighbour that I'm concerned about and I can't glean any information from sale records and ownership records that we're privy to, I might knock on the door of the next neighbour, provided they're not freaking me out as well, and ask them for some insight into the neighbourhood. Or if there's a particular unit in a block, I only have to ask the other unit holders just to confirm my suspicion. And it's not always easy to tell. Sometimes it's a case of someone who's really unwell, but they're making a massive social menace of themselves, and there are issues that you can see in the owners corporation minutes or strata minutes that indicate that they've had regular police call outs and warnings offered to these people to tone it down. I've got to think twice about putting an investor into a block like that, and I've got to think really carefully about putting someone who's vulnerable and not able to look after themselves so well in a situation like that into a property. So equipping the buyer with all of this information, or even just tipping them off about my sixth sense, is really important. But I've got some of, a little list of things that I've experienced before in neighbourhoods and with direct neighbours that are some telltale signs. One is high security. When you see hidden cameras and lots of them, or padlocks and chains on doors. These are not regular, don't deliver junk mail type warning signs. This is something else going on. Locked sheds that aren't allowed to be opened. I remember inspecting a property in Ballarat probably about 3 years ago, and my sixth sense was going off, and I asked the agent a lot of questions, and I could tell she was a bit uncomfortable about, she works for the vendor. She didn't want to say anything that would jeopardise the sale. And I insisted on seeing in the garage, and she kept saying, I haven't got the keys. And, well, can you get them? Can you arrange it today? I'm not purchasing this property without seeing everything. Anyway, the garage windows were blacked out. And when I went in there, it was like I'd landed on a tropical island, and I'm talking middle of winter in Ballarat. And there's all of these tents set up like little mini spray booths. When you guys might not know, but when you get a spray tan, you go into this like spray booth. Some people, when they do it, they do house calls. They'll use one of those self pop-up tents, and you go in there, so all of the tan spray goes over it. Anyway, they had lots of these with warm lights and fans going, like
Chili
where I'm
plants.
going. Yeah, like this place was the most incredible conservatory
Bit of
I had seen
hydroponics.
in a long time. Yeah, but when it's that hardcore, who you're dealing with, I was just really uncomfortable. I had
Personal use, surely.
there are some call outs.
Medicinal only.
Yeah.
Yes, I've had situations where my sense of safety was really heightened, and particularly when a couple of agents call out to show you through a property. Why are they in a pair? Cate Bakos is not scary. Why are they both going together? And sometimes agents will say, it's padlocked or it's key safed, and I'll give you the code. Are they being lazy, or do they not want to go? And I had one of those situations, and I pulled up and thought, I don't know if I want to go into this house alone. And I had the key safe code, so I parked the car. As soon as I got out of it, went to walk across the road, I could see a couple of guys who were clearly, working together, and they wandered towards the house. And by that stage, I was too late to go back to my car. I had to get inside and quickly lock the door. And of course, I was dealing with chains and padlocks inside the door as well. So I got in the front door, but the house was chained. It was not a nice feeling at all, and I had to make a phone call. And in a job like this, you've got to keep personal safety paramount. And we've got codes in our office. If I ring my office and say, can you pull out the red folder, that means where I am, call the police right now. So you've got to look after yourself. And there are some occasions where you get those senses, and you have to choose to do a U-turn and stay away. So
What were those guys doing?
Yeah.
I mean, like...
What
I
happened
don't know.
there?
They were banging on the door, and so I started talking loudly like I was talking to someone. And then I had the wherewithal to ring my husband and have him really loud on loudspeaker, like we were having a conversation, like there was someone in there, and they disappeared.
Yeah.
So
Like things like,
well
geez,
done.
you shouldn't have brought the gun here today. You know, put that away. Like you could hurt someone.
yeah,
It's
no,
one thing for you
That
to do
might
all
be
this
going a step too
bodybuilding
far,
and karate.
no, I kept it Pleasantville, like we were just chatting about the weather. And I texted him first and said, when I call you, just have a very normal conversation with me. And you've just, then they're the days that you have to think on your feet, and you hope you don't have many days like that. But it was
That's
memorable.
terrifying.
Yeah, and I've had a situation where a vendor wanted to meet me, and the agent said, "Oh, the vendor wants to meet you. They'll be there," and that was creepy, and I could tell by the gear that he had in the house, I wasn't meant to be there, so I just left really quickly. So yes, you get sixth sense, and you get confronted by some pretty hideous things.
Gee, they both sound quite full on, those two situations.
I'm selling the dream for buyers agency, aren't I?
Oh my gosh! Well,
It was just,
what was the
just
price
Range
point of
Rovers
those
and
properties,
lattes.
Kate?
Yeah, good question, Dave. They weren't ultra cheap, but for their land size, they were.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Some
they were
giveaways.
houses that were set for bulldozing, but yeah, it was not a pleasant brief.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, that sounds horrifying.
Yeah.
So aside from the need for your own personal security, when else do you get a sense as opposed to negative information?
Let's talk about the dwelling itself. I know that I'm taking on a potential situation that won't end well, or that will be a gigantic waste of time for me and my buyer, if there are issues that I can just foresee that aren't worth tackling. So, for example, illegally converted spaces. When you look at a property that's had an illegal conversion, or illegal reno or illegal works, how much of it do you want to unravel, and how much do you want to be liable for or responsible for, and how much are you taking on that your insurer may not? So I'm talking about the case of council knocking on the door and issuing a notice, a show cause, which means make it right or pull it down, and you've got 7 days. And this is a very real concept. If you take on a property that's had illegal works and council find out about it, usually they find out because someone who doesn't like you dobs. But it happens. I don't want to put a client through any of that, and I don't want to overcapitalise on a property that has to have things unravelled. So I can sense when something's illegal, and it's not just missing paperwork. You can spot signs of something that a surveyor would not sign off, and that, to your point, Dave, is just accrued, information and experience over the years. Dodgy renovations, changes that I know should have had permits, and things being hidden. Paint over something that I think, that might be damp. I'll go back to the car, I'll get my moisture meter, and I'll prove myself right. Problem solved. I've saved the client $600 with the building inspection. Rugs over dodgy flooring. I think if I spot one thing that's been deliberately hidden on a property, my sixth sense about that agent or that vendor is already going off, and I don't trust them with anything else. If they've hidden something sneaky, what else have they hidden? So those are the circumstances where I get a sense without even having to check paperwork is missing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, obviously, people can get a building inspection completed, but that's not going to pick everything up, is it, Kate?
No, it's not. And sometimes I think if I can pick up something for them, I'm no builder and I'll never claim to be, but I think about all of the years that I've done this, and the building and reports that I've poured through, and the builders that I've debriefed with. This might come as a surprise to you both, but whenever we have a client get a building inspection, we ask their builder to give them a phone call and debrief, and to give us a phone call and debrief in layman's terms, so that we're better equipped to understand and go through, digest their report with the pictures. And over these years, I've had many back and forths with builders. You've said that there's water retention here, or there's cracked gutters here, or there's missing flashing here. How can that be fixed? What does it cost? How quickly should it be done? They're my 3 questions. How do you do it? How much will it cost? And when do we need to do it?
I feel like that's sorry, Kate.
No, you're right.
I feel like that's like a mandatory thing with building inspectors. Like you read a building report and it's like, don't go in there, the mold will kill you, and if that doesn't get you, the asbestos will. And then you ring them up and they go, oh, no, we just have to sort of disclaim it, but it's fine. Like, I'd buy it. I'm like, geez.
Yes. Very true. It's, full of disclaimers, and they're on the hook, and they've got insurance that will only cover them if they're really thorough. And I don't talk to them verbally just to talk the client down. That's not the method at all. It's just to understand it better. And after all of these years of doing that, there's so many different combinations and permutations of issues that we've discussed with builders and walked away from as well. And so you get a better sense when you see something and measure something and photograph something. You don't need to call in a builder. You know that it will fail. You know that that will be a major sensitivity or an expensive fix. You can walk away from it. And that's where I'm really grateful to my sixth sense, because we don't waste time queuing up for that property and then spending $600 and opting out of it. We can just move on and find the next one and keep the assignment rolling.
So there's an element of efficiency built into the sixth sense, which again, I think is relevant to probably most high-end professionals, is they're able to be better at their job and achieve more in less time at the end of the day because of efficiency through accumulated experience. So you have a section here in our notes about quoted prices. Obviously, you know your local values. So this isn't necessarily a sixth sense, is it?
I absolutely think it is. If I sense the agent's lying to me, I'm already skeptical about every word that they say. And there are some agents out there who continually tell fibs about the likely selling price, particularly when it comes to auction underquoting. And you'd like to think that they get to know Cate Bakos and we do 15 years worth of deals and they stop lying, but not every agent's like that. And most of them are. They're really straight with me and they know how we roll. But if I have an agent that I know can't help themselves and I can sense that they're lying to me, it is a sense. It's not just about doing my comparable sales analysis and then saying told you. And if I have to deal with an agent who's telling me lies, well, they're on my list already, and my sixth sense rarely lets me down. And after all, we're in the business of working with people, so my people radar is pretty sharp, and trust is absolutely everything in this business. And once it's gone, it's really hard to get it back.
Yeah.
I remember you saying to me early on in our friendship that you're a good judge of character, and you'd clocked me. You're like, I'm going to let you into the circle. I don't know what you saw, but you certainly. I've seen that evidenced elsewhere with other people. That your spidey sense have got up, and I'm like, I'm going to take that on board. And I'm like, oh yeah, that person is a monster. Speaking of monsters, there are a few different actors in these real estate transactions. You've got yourself, you've got the pest and building people, you've got the agents, but the vendors have a part to play in some of these transactions. Sometimes they're just kind of like a mythical thing off to the side, making decisions and providing that to the agent. But often they kind of present themselves, and you've got a real sixth sense for vendors. What do you sort of pick up on with vendors, and what can, say, the listeners take from your experience to say, look, if they're behaving in this way, this is a red flag?
Yeah, great question. Difficult vendors come in all shapes and forms and different degrees of difficulty. And I can generally sense a difficult vendor pretty early on. And the agent's the conduit there. They're not going to say to me, oh, Cate, these guys are awful. I can't wait to offload them. But you can tell in your conversations with the agent when they're having a hard time. Agents are people. They love people generally. Sometimes the vendor might be difficult because the agent's been difficult, but typically they've just chosen them. So, from nasty separations to reluctant sales, we've experienced many challenging situations. And in fairness, most vendors who are selling reluctantly aren't likely to become difficult, but we've certainly experienced them. You get your penny pinching vendors who remove appliances on settlement date. I will not get burnt by that again. I have a list of goods or chattels that I'm very, very specific about, particularly when I sense I've got a difficult vendor or a penny pinching vendor. We're deliberate with our contract inclusions, and we video our inspections very carefully to demonstrate what was working at the time of sale, because we have to rely on this with lawyers if something's broken and the vendor doesn't want to touch it. So if I get a difficult vendor sense, I'm very, very strict with my contract conditions and inclusions. And it's about being really firm with the wording of those clauses as well.
So can
So what
people take appliances, Kate? Let's
They're
say
not-
you've got some I don't know, some Smeg appliances, and then you come back the next week and it's like Technica. Like shit, what a crap
Don't
thing
laugh,
to
it
do.
happens. Yeah.
That's
So
ridiculous.
I take video evidence now. I video and talk. Now here's a Bosch, here's a Miele. I'm really, really clear about it. And when it comes to kitchens that are built in and there's a word for it. You've got your dishwasher behind a panel facade and your fridge
Like
is inbuilt.
integrated.
Integrated. I had a vendor once. We moved the stuff within the integrated kitchen, and the agent said to me, "Well, technically you didn't have it in the goods. You've got to be kidding. You've got integrated kitchen in your listing." We ended up fighting that, and it wasn't pleasant. So, did I know that vendor was difficult? I had an inkling from him, towards the end. Going forward, every single difficult vendor, I'll just throw the book at them and be very, very firm with video evidence and contract inclusions.
people's ability to be tight will never cease to astound me. Some people have an amazing skill in that area.
And bitterness is another one. Just saying no for the sake of things. I mean, at the end of the day, a settlement process is pretty regimented and regulated. And, they get to pick up the keys when the settlement's gone through. But you can have vendors agreeing to things and then backflipping. Things like, could I, get my new bed delivered and have it stored in your garage the day before settlement? Oh, yeah, sure, no worries, should be fine. And then, they decide they hate your guts and then no one's coming on our property. So when things are agreed and it's all goodwill and everyone's, meeting each other for the first time after the auction, and the vendor says, "Yeah, no worries, I've got all of those warranties for you," I'm really quick to put it in writing.
So what are some other examples that have occurred?
Things like providing evidence that compliance has been done, whether it's pool safety or signing off documentation from works. If a difficult vendor verbally agrees to give me something, I will document it and have the agent arrange for them to sign it, even if it's after the event that's run through the solicitors, because, things that they agree to verbally and things that they actually deliver for you can be two different things. And it might be junk under the house or, a big pile of timber in the garage or tidying up a messy lawn. If it's not documented, it's very, very hard to get a nasty vendor to do it.
Yeah, and so sometimes you'll have had that discussion. They'll have agreed that will be sorted out after the sale, and then you need to follow through and get it written into the contract after you purchase it.
Or write to the solicitor and have them contact the vendor's solicitor and agree that this is an additional agreement.
Yeah, and you'll often do that though after you buy it, or at times. And when might it differentiate when you do it prior to the purchase versus after?
Prior is better because it's in the contract of sale and they sign it. And so we chat to a solicitor or a conveyancer and this is what we want to achieve. Can you give me the slab of words that will guarantee us that it will either be done or we can hold XYZ over them? It might be withholding money. It might be delaying settlement. It might be giving us an out. We can actually bring the contract to an end, get the deposit money back and walk away. Depending on the severity, the thing that you're asking for. Right now I'm dealing with one that requires a certificate of final inspection. This should have been done ages ago. Who knows what happened? I don't think there was anything nasty in it. I think there was a process with a renovation. The vendor went through all of the right steps and didn't finish step number 10 out of 10. And of course, we've got this thing that's overhanging and it was only picked up just before we purchased the property and signed the contract. So we managed to get a condition in there saying that we can't settle until it's done. We had a very short settlement. This thing is still not issued from the council. It's on its way, but it's delayed settlement. Not ideal. It's not what either party wanted, but it ensures that they get a property with all of the right documentation.
Yeah. I was just picking up on the point that you said sometimes you'll put them in after you purchase the property, but obviously it's preferred to do it beforehand
Yeah.
because it's
It
locked
might be
away.
something like the buyer calls you 2 weeks after they've signed the contract and says, exciting times, and we've ordered a new dining suite, and the only delivery date that they can do is the day before settlement. Do you reckon the vendors would let us use the garage? And I'm like, oh, let me find out. And I call the agent and ask them about their weekend and tell them they're awesome, and then ask if I can get them to have a chat with the vendor. And then when the vendor says yes, we'll just send a note back to the solicitor and say, just confirming this has been agreed. Can you confirm it in writing with the other side?
Yeah, cool. And so let's talk about strata properties. Properties with owners, corporations, or strata managers are obviously a whole nother kettle of fish. And there's more things at play often with these types of apartments or units or townhouses.
Yeah.
When does this sixth sense kick into gear here?
Yeah, it comes down to a few things, Dave. Our discussion with the strata manager isn't always a perfect indicator of issues in the block, but a hostile strata manager can make or break a deal. If the AGM minutes show up issues in the block, or if a dominant personality within the quorum seems to be making things difficult within the block, we can often sense that. You can either sense it in person or you can sense it when you're reading the minutes. And, a difficult OC manager or strata manager that won't give you any feedback. Why do they hate their job so much? Or why are they being so protective? What are they hiding? And sometimes they're instructed not to talk direct to anyone outside of the block, in which case we need to relay our questions through the agent, through the vendor to the strata manager. Now, if any of those chains refuse to do that, I'm already smelling or sensing a red flag, because why are they blocking our communication? What is there to hide? And strata managers are really important to talk to, because your AGM minutes only tell you what's going on in the block up to the date of that AGM. And if that AGM was 11 and a half months ago, then you've had almost a whole year of stuff that could go wrong that might have been reported that hasn't hit the paperwork yet. And they're only legislated to provide the AGM minutes. So I want to know, is there anything else that's happened in the last 11 and a half months? Here's my list of questions. Has anything been reported? Have any levies been struck? Have any problematic neighbours or residents been on your radar? Have there been any complaints about social discord? We ask all of these questions so that we can relay that. So if I'm getting bounced, I know one of those things might be occurring. And documentation or lack thereof is another indicator. But one of the biggest warning bells is cheap or inactive strata management. And what I'm talking about is, when the agent shows you a block of flats or villa units and says, and the best thing is the owner's corporation's only $600 a year. It's really cheap. I'm just thinking, that's not even getting me basic insurance, let alone special levies for, fixing roof issues or repainting or window, whatever. You want to have a little kitty there for the things that are going to go wrong in time. So cheap or inactive strata management freaks me out. If there are visible issues within the block and no one wants to spend money, my alarm bells are going off really loudly.
Strata's a real, that's a real area of conflict. Like you mentioned, kind of the personalities. Like I've read through strata meeting minutes trying to find, evidence of building works and improvements just from a tax point of view, and read things like Mr. Percival has been warned not to use fragrant language with Mrs. Smith again. And I'm like, wow, I wish I was at some of these meetings. I've heard stories about, a kindly man sort of saying, oh, you're not going to the AGM? Well, give me your proxy. Like, we're on the same page. I know what you want. And then he's just changed the bylaws to allow smoking on the balconies because that was his whole agenda. Like there's all sorts of wonderful stories that happen in strata. I was looking at a strata report by Strata Communities Australia, and they've done a heap of research. I want to actually make that for another show, but of course you need to get a strata report. But sometimes there are things that can be missed, so that's a real big one. I want to talk. I want to ask you about legal representation on the vendor's side, Cate. You raised an interesting concern. What negative feelings does your spidey sense give you when you come across a difficult contract?
Well, in conveyancing land, they call it a skinny contract. That means it's flimsy or it's missing bits, or it's like they've given you the absolute bare minimum. And that's a vendor usually who's watching the purse strings, and they've got someone who's running a very cheap business and offering a very cheap service. Problem with that is you don't have all of the disclosures. You might have the very bare minimum legally required ones. So, a copy of their water bill. You're not getting a water certificate. You can't see where the specific easements are. And that's okay. You can get your conveyancer or solicitor to order those things. They come at a cost, but you're doing your due diligence. But the problem with a flimsy contract, how cheap is that service? I remember years ago we had a client who insisted on using one of these conveyancers, and their conveyancing address and domain, well, they didn't have a domain. It was a Big Pond address, and you couldn't catch them. And it was the phone number was a landline. It always went to their family voicemail. Hi, you've called Josie and Robbie and blah blah blah. Leave a message, and they'd never ring you back. And this settlement was delayed. It was an absolute mess because we had someone who was just too cheap. The other one that's a red flag is nasty contracts with really unfair special conditions. And in Victoria, we have general conditions which have been determined by the Law Institute and agreed to be on every REIV contract. And they're general conditions that protect the interests of the buyer and the seller. So they've been determined as fair, and they've got solutions for how you tackle problems. So, if someone's late, this is what happens. This is the penalty. It's got all of the defined penalty interest when you're late for settlement. Everything's in there. So you get a lot of lawyers out there. I'm not going to just circle the Collins Street ones, but the solicitors that prepare their own contracts and they replace general conditions with special conditions. So they're working for the vendor, so they'll strike out the vendor's rights to take action and to enforce some of those things that are general conditions. So when you see general conditions tampered with and then nasty special conditions put into the contract, you'll sometimes see conveyancers do it, and it's a bit of a fee grab. So changing the settlement time, it comes at a fee of $300. Changing the nominee's name, that's another fee. And so all of these things just stack up. And they might say that settlement has to occur between 10 and 3, when settlements can actually occur between 9 and 5. I've even had settlements happen at 6 o'clock. So nasty contracts are something to watch out for, because if you've got a solicitor that isn't focused on the commercial outcome, which is their vendor getting a sale, and they're just having a fight for the sake of it, or they're being super overprotective so that they never have to deal with any of these issues at settlement, they can just palm it all off and tell the purchaser bad luck. That's a warning bell, because it can make settlement really difficult for all parties, and sometimes the purchaser is the one that loses out.
So, Cate, that's been a great overview of various examples of your six senses when it comes to property selection and the whole property buying experience. Now, just circling back a little bit, you mentioned a sordid history at the beginning of the episode. I'm not sure how much we actually want to hear about
let's
this.
Get weird with it.
Yeah,
Mike's not getting excited.
What sort of things can your senses tell you? And go, do you want to share any detail about?
Of course, crime and crime scenes, they're not uncommon. They're not common, but they do happen. Paperwork, agent disclosure and news feeds, that generally gives you a heads up on a situation like this. But there are times when my sixth sense nerves tell me that something isn't quite right as well. Whether it be historical drug production in the property or even something more sinister, I certainly do get a sense. And if someone's passed away in a property, I can sometimes tell. And I know that sounds really creepy. Perhaps it's a particular scent that, my subconscious picks up. Maybe it's a sixth sense. I'm not sure. But if I sense it, I ask about it. And I haven't been wrong on that sense to this day. When I've thought, I reckon someone's died semi-recently or recently in this property, and then I've checked into it, I've been right. If I know about
is it often been like the elderly, so therefore the way the house is decked out and the smell of not being as lived in or cleaned as regularly and that sort of thing? Like there's some elements that you can put together that,
There are a little bit of that. You can sometimes tell when someone's really loved and lived in that house for a long time and they're gone, and there's just that feeling like, I think this was, an older person's home and they've now left this earth and they died in the home. And Interesting though, a lot of people have lived in a home and then they go into a nursing home, and that's how they pass away or in hospital or whatever. But when I've sensed someone's died in the home, if the agent's known, I've found that I've been right. Without wanting to sound creepy, there is a scent, especially if they've been there for a little bit of time. And I experienced that when I was a listing agent. I had a property, and you could certainly tell there was a scent.
Yeah.
So you're respectful about all of that. But if I know, or if I can find out, I have to let my buyer know. And some people are cool with it, some people aren't. I've had a couple of properties where there's been suicides. I've had a couple of properties where there's been homicides. You have to disclose it. So material facts will certainly disclose homicides, but the long and short of it is, if I know, I disclose and let the buyer decide if they're cool or not.
So when does the selling agent have to tell you? So like if someone passes away peacefully, that's not sort of like a big event. But if somebody is murdered or commits suicide in the dwelling, is that where the legislation protects the purchaser to say, yeah, look, some pretty awful stuff's happened here?
Yeah, there's in Victoria we have material facts, and the legislation's different from state to territory. In New South Wales, they certainly have to be upfront about everything. In Victoria, if it's not a material fact, but the purchaser asks the agent, and the agent knows the answer, they legally have to answer it. You can't hide it.
What's the definition of a material fact in?
Well,
the
you
case
wouldn't
of...
have an elderly person passing away in a house as a material fact. You'd have a homicide or drug-related crimes or anything that's a crime.
criminal.
And there's other things too, like asbestos has been determined to be present there, or something that the authority. The material facts disclosure sheet is very clear, and it's available online with Consumer Affairs Victoria.
Let's say it's not a material fact, like let's say someone just passed away. Typically, what's the buyer's response to that? Does that impact the value, or does it just depend on person to person?
Yeah, great question. Buyers are pretty polarised. They'll either say, no way, I can't do it, or that they'll say, I don't care at all, like it's not an issue. The house is lovely, it's been loved, and that happens. I mean, I live in a house that was built in 1889, I think the date is, and I don't know how many births and deaths have happened in that house. Yeah, I know.
Hopefully not all at once.
Yeah.
Well, the people that we purchased, the family we purchased the property from, there were births in our front bedroom, which is my bedroom. How wonderful. But, were there deaths? Possibly. You've got to talk to the client about it, though, and just give them that opportunity. It's some cultural values are very sensitive about properties that have had people die in them. Where other people are pretty sensitive about a property that's had crime-related issues, because, if it's drug-related, will there be, knocks at the door for the next 10 years? You just don't know. So if the agent knows and they're asked in Victoria, they have to answer.
If it's a material fact and our listeners...
the material fact is disclosed.
Right.
But if it's not a material fact and a client and a purchaser asks an agent anything, like, do you know if they died in a nursing home or in the house? If the agent knows that they died in the house, they've got to say that.
Interesting. Well, look, on that note, it's been a fantastic episode, Cate. Are there any final tips?
Ending on tips, sorry, guys.
Yeah. Well, is there any final tips you'd like to share before we go into our gold nuggets?
Yeah, one of my most important tips out of all of this stuff is making sure you feel safe in that neighbourhood. If you don't, or if you're not sure, work your way around the neighbourhood. Go for a walk. Change it up at different times of the day. Be with someone, obviously. Don't road test it at night by yourself in the dark. But if your sixth sense is unsettled, then it's not for you.
Very good. Well, it's clear Cate has a sixth sense, Mike, that you and I probably don't. But certainly around property, and probably a lot of courage too, given some of those situations you've dealt with.
It's all about getting a great deal, Dave.
But again, I think it just illustrates all the different aspects to consider when buying a property, and that's not always as simple as it can seem on the outside, which I think the history of this podcast certainly helps people to better understand. So without further ado, we'll go into our gold nuggets.
Now it's time for us to go mining for our gold nugget property tip of the day.
My gold nugget actually came from a presentation that Cate did with Veronica Morgan at the REBA conference, and that was like this due diligence checklist, and it was about neighbours. And when you think about neighbours, it's like, okay, I want to buy house X, it's number 20, so I'm going to knock on 18 and I'm going to knock on 22 and say, what's up? But the tip was to knock on 16 and 24 to ask about 18 and 22. And I thought that was quite novel, right? Because, you know, those people might be nice as pie for some particular reason, or they might have some sort of vested interest, but you can get a real sense of those neighbours by just going that one further. And I think like you might kind of think, look, this is a big transaction. This is, you know, $1 million we're going to spend on this house. You know, we'll deal with whatever. But people can be quite irrational, and a neighbour can certainly ruin your experience of that house. So that was something that I thought was pretty novel.
I've got a gold nugget, and it relates to putting things in writing. Doesn't matter what handshake agreement you have and what should be right advice you're given. If it's an important thing and it's been agreed to, get it in writing. And if someone's reluctant to sign something in writing, there's your warning bell right there.
I know dealing with credit assessors, I talk to our staff about make sure you get it in writing. If they've said they'll approach it this way or consider it that way, get it in writing before you lodge the loan.
Speaking of which, after we record on Friday, I want it in writing that we're going for wine.
Oh, memo's
We'll
going
put that
away
in
right now. I'll send you a text.
Email as soon as we finish.
Let's fire up DocuSign.
All right. Well, thanks particularly, Cate, for your contributions to that episode. That was really interesting.
Thanks for the psychological breakdowns, Dave. That was awesome. I never thought about it like that. I love that you've taken the art and turned it into science. It's exactly how I roll.
That's good, wasn't it? I think we give him Employee of the Month for the Property Trio show.
Thank you. Sure. Well, that probably means you two shout me on Friday then.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not getting that in writing.
Just one shout. Well, look forward to seeing you both on Friday to record a couple episodes in person. Until then, our listeners will hear from us in a week's time.
Awesome.
See you later.
Good to see you guys.